sometimes I do think that we try to take on way more control over our children's lives than what we actually have, rather than trusting God in their life and in what they're doing.
Welcome to Beyond the Message, where sermon series go beyond Sunday mornings. Here we dive deeper into the truths shared in our series, and maybe even share some things that didn't make it into a message. We'll also answer the questions you may have in relation to the series. This is where curiosity creates conversation, and faith gets strengthened.
All right, well, welcome to Beyond the Message. It's now, week 7 and 8?
Week 7 and 8 of By Faith.
Yep, we're going with Moses. So it's part 1, part 2 of a several series. This is good. I like it.
Moses' family and Moses himself.
Yeah, no, it's good.
That's what.
Which, it's crazy to look at it, like, going back, it's like, what are the verses that we're covering here in Hebrews? Like 23 and 24. Like, you only knock out 2 verses and we get
two verses of Hebrews.
Yeah, Hebrews is like
15 chapters of Exodus.
Yeah, that's true. So, like, context is like, that's like when you see the drop down, you're like, oh, there's not so much to cover today. You click the arrow and all of a sudden it's like 25 things expand out the list. I'm glad that, like, my honey-do list doesn't expand. It's like, it's just one line item.
Just one? Really? That's it?
No.
Okay.
Nothing hidden. There's no subterfuge. There's several line items.
There's several lines, just nothing hidden.
Yeah, they don't expand. There's no plus button. No, I'm excited. I think Moses is quite the character. I think we talk about him like, some of the guys before, like Enoch stuff, I never really thought of as in the Hall of Faith. But when we're looking at Moses, you're like, yeah. There's certain guys, they're the shoe in the first ballot Hall of Faith.
You gotta expect him to be in there. And you think about it, and I think I made this comment, like the people who are receiving this letter to the Hebrews, they're probably waiting. Once he starts listing all these the individuals in the Hall of Faith, they're waiting to find out, all right, where's Moses going to fall into this? Moses has got to be into this. And the author had already hit on Moses when he told them that Christ is the greater Moses, which I'm sure they took kindly to. But it's like, you mean the guy who's written 5 books? He's like, well, technically, all those 5 books and all the other ones also point to me. So that's right.
Jesus already got the response preemptively.
Yeah, it's shaking their world. I mean, it's hard for us to grasp that, but this was a total perspective shift for the Hebrews, for the Jewish people. I mean, this is what their whole faith was centered around, what God did through Moses. And now you've got Jesus has come into the picture, and the faith is now centered around Jesus, not what God did through Moses. And that's what the author of Hebrews is trying to point out. But that doesn't mean that Moses doesn't matter. Moses is still in the Hall of Faith. He's still a very integral part of the whole aspect of Judaism. He's a very essential part of what God had done through that nation, and very central in leading up to Christ, and a picture of what Christ would do for us. So,
Yeah, I think it's an interesting example too, like how we see like Jesus will push back against Pharisees on like the different ways they act. Like, oh, you're so focused on the law, but yet you don't even, fulfill the law, things like that. But also it's like the idea of like looking for this person, this Messiah to come, but then they kind of hold up these other, not necessarily false messiahs, but like where the focus is, like they're still focused on Moses. And he's like, man, Moses was just pointing to someone else, pointing to this greater Moses that ended up being Jesus. So I think that's a good reminder. It's like, I never really put 2 and 2 together. Like we always talk about, like you said, Israel was a person. Then he also becomes the nation of Israel. It's like the same thing as like Hebrews. It's like, oh, like, that wasn't the city of Hebrews. Like it's just written, like we got the Romans, it's like that's from Rome, but it's also just 2 Romans. Like, but Hebrews, there's no city of Hebrews. It's like he's writing it to the Hebrews. Like I never thought about it's a letter to a people as opposed to a place. And that's such an interesting concept of like where we are. Like you say, it's like he's a key cog in the Hall of Faith, but he is not the Hall of Faith itself. Right. So. Well, so like you talk about in part 1 is a little bit more focused on the family of Moses. Like, and you started with Joseph, and I love just like the little snippet there about Joseph, like how his belief remained. Like we talk about faith while you're living, but even a faith in dying is where Joseph lived. Like he knew that, yes, there was a promise, and I got to play a part in, the salvation of a people, but then we're supposed to go back. Like this is not where we're supposed to stay. Like, yes, there's promises, there's long-term promises and there's short-term provisions, I think is what it was. So I love that idea, even that down to like he was put in a coffin that was as like literally worded as mobile, like he expected to be moved one day. Like, so whether if it's not within his lifetime, then it's going to be within hopefully his children's lifetime. And so does anything about that stand out to you? Why was that a snippet that you created?
Yeah, I think I like what you pointed out. I mean, that's an incredible faith. You think about Joseph saying, look, the promise of God does not die when I die.
Yeah.
And I think that's just an incredible thing. And that for us, the promise that we have now through Christ, it doesn't end when we leave this earth. It only culminates when Christ returns.
Yeah.
Right. And so we keep continuing to leave that legacy of faith. And that legacy of, this is the promise. Keep moving towards that promise. Don't ever stop moving towards that promise. Yeah. And don't get stuck in the place that God has delivered you to now, because there's somewhere else for God to deliver you to next.
Yeah. No, I think that's ideal, and I think we see that with Moses play out as well. But and we talked about with Enoch and Methuselah and all that. But it's like, man, what a lineage of just like of working through your faith. Like, and we've said that before about leaving that legacy, And you talk about that with his parents. Like, like I've never thought really, like I really haven't given a second thought to who were Moses' parents. Like, the story of the mom is willing to do it, and you're like, I think that is an act of faith, like trusting in God. But I never thought about like just the idea of like truly like now that I have a kid, like, I'm like literally trusting God, like they're throwing them into the same river to die, and I'm just going to place them in the river intentionally to live. Like that's a different world to live in. Like it's no different than the same sacrifice we're seeing with Abraham that we've talked about. It's like, I'm willing to give my son, but I guess at least there's some solace in you still have other kids, but it's like, gosh, there's no, I try thinking like the devil's advocate there. Like, nope, it's tough. There's no way I want to put my baby in a basket. Yeah,
you're still letting go, and that's tough. But there is that visual, though. I mean, when you look back at all those things, and we know what we know now, that visual of what God is doing. He is rescuing from death to life.
Yeah.
I mean, we saw that with Noah through the flood, which I mentioned that the same word for ark is the same word used for basket.
Yeah.
And so, but God delivers from death to life through Noah and the ark. God delivers. He has that picture of death to life with Isaac, Abraham and Isaac. You have that picture of death to life now with Moses being put in a river that was meant for death, but yet he finds life. And so, it's amazing when you look at how God's orchestrating all this and just putting it all together.
Yeah, no, and it's like I always love I love the movie like Prince of Egypt or wherever, like the depiction of it, and it's like it's through the hippos and the crocodiles and everything. I was like, man, like for real though, like you're not just putting them in a river and like, it's just this nice calm stream, like it's not the watery, like it's like, if you start here, it'll end up near Walmart, and someone's just down there. The boat dog is like, no, this is treacherous stuff, like. But then how there's still such an aspect with the Egyptians of like the idea of its fertility or its provision and all these different things. But also there's the parallel of he was delivered through water, but then the people of Israel delivered through water by completely traveling on dry ground. So like even seeing that dichotomy within Moses' life, like from ark to river basket to walking through, is God maneuvers in whatever way he so chooses. And I think that's such a fun thing. But I love the parallel that you talked about, like it's the tar, the pitch, and the papyrus. Yeah. And you talked about how even being raised in the household, like you said toward the end of the message, of how being raised in the household, Moses learned how to read and to write, and then it led him to the ability to, be able to write down the first 5 books of the Old Testament, like the law of Moses. The crazy thing is he's in a basket of papyrus, a common writing instrument.
Right, that's right.
So it's like man's in a paper basket, floating down, but then later he's going to be writing on papyrus to record the history of his own history. That's a very useful instrument of God's provision and just the ebbs and flows of it. But I also love that it stood out, like the thing was like that the princess thought he might be one of the Hebrew children and was just like, yeah, I'll keep him. Like that's a wild concept. Like, it's not like she's like, I wonder whose baby this is. She's like, this is probably one of those Hebrew kids that are being killed. I'm going to keep him anyway. And so I think there's some That's I think seeing that love there is important, but also seeing the grace that's there as well. I think the biggest theme of all this is the idea, like, for at least that stuck out to me, was the idea of parenting and release.
Yes.
And so you want to talk just a little bit more about the release concept. I know you talked about it with twins coming up. But.
Yeah, and that was tough. I remember when I was jumping into this part of the series initially in my study and preparing this message. And I remember getting to that point, like I got emotional preparing this message because it was about, I started looking, I'm like, they had to release Moses and let Moses go. Mm-hmm. And I started thinking about how often, we have to do that as parents, how often we have to learn to release our kids. And the older they get, the more volatile those moments of release become, and the more challenging they become, the more difficult they become. But we just have to let go. And as we are in a season where we're about to let go, as at one of the bigger stages of letting go to go to college, that's tough. And that's
100%.
And so, but it was just interesting to me to look at the parents' faith there, to say, I'm willing. I know that God has given me this child. And even if I don't have the opportunity to be always face to face with this child, God's purpose is not for this child's life to just end.
Yeah.
So I'm going to release this child into God's hands and just trust that God's going to work in the situation. And so that you made the comment about the Nile's not the Wateree, but can you even imagine as a parent putting your child in a basket in the Wateree River, which is our local river, and just letting your child float down the river, hoping that it's going to save his life?
Oh, a couple months ago, I didn't even sit my kid down in our backyard to walk. You know what I mean? He thinks he can fall on a stick. You know what I mean? He don't know how to brace himself. I can't imagine in water and hope. I'm assuming it has a lid. But I have no idea. Just an open basket. We have literally, it's in our kitchen area now. We just use it for storage. But it's called a Moses basket. I learned this as a parent. You can use it as an old bassinet. It's just a little woven basket. It's got handles. Yeah. Put your baby in it to sleep. We used it to carry our kid up into a loft, and it's there's no way I'm sending him down in a river. I was looking at it the other day, when I was prepping for this, I'm in a river? In a river? That thing's not much better than a cardboard box. So no, I cannot imagine doing that.
And you look at parenting today,
Yeah.
We put, no offense if you're this parent, but we put helmets on our kids for the least little thing. They can't go anywhere. We're so protective of anything happening to our children. Mm-hmm. And Moses' mom puts her baby in a basket, lets him go. But then not only that, after nursing, takes the child back to the palace and releases her child to a place that she knows is not going to raise their child in the same value system that she would raise her child. Mm-hmm. And that is a tough concept. But it makes you wonder sometimes, do we try to control with our kids beyond our ability to really control? Mm-hmm. We have this false mindset of control. And I get it. Listen, I get it, because I remember one of the first times putting my kids in someone else's car. Uh-huh. And letting them drive off with my kids in car seats in their car. And I was nervous. Not that I'm some perfect driver, and I can get in an accident. Accident can happen to me while I'm driving, but there's just something about that mindset. If they're in my car and I'm driving, I'm in control. Mm-hmm. But how in control am I really? Yeah. And so, but I think that's our mindset as parents sometimes. And I'm not meaning to take this in a way that belittles parents and our parenting styles, but sometimes I do think that we try to take on way more control over our children's lives than what we actually have, rather than trusting God in their life and in what they're doing.
Yeah, and I think that's applicable to so many other things as well. Because absolutely, first time just my parents drove away with our kid, you're first of all, that car seat better be buckled up the right way in that car. He better be rear facing. He better be buckled. We've cinched that thing down. There's so many things. I'm but my dad's probably the best driver I know. You know what I mean? It's like, but he's also kind of the craziest driver I know. So it's a fine line, you know. Right. But he's preventative. He's never been in a car accident. So whatever the case, but yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. He's got. We always say my dad's got great guardian angels. Like those guys are going to go straight to retirement as soon as he arrives in heaven. Like it's going to be a pat on the back. The guys are going to have gray beards and be like, "What are those?" Those are Greg's angels. Like they're burnout. They are retired from duty. You know, but it definitely is an act of faith. But talking about like that level of control, I think we do that with various aspects, not just the parenting side. I think it's you've talked about recently with like releasing finances. Like, are you willing to Cain and Abel, give of your first? You know, because are you wanting the control, or are you ultimately wanting him in control? You know, it's like it's all feigned ideas of control that we have, when in reality it all belongs to God anyway. Are we just willing to partner with him and let him be in control instead of trying to seize the wheel from him? And I think this is just another example of that. Like, are we willing to release our children, or are we just willing to release our lives? Because I mean, very much my kid feels is a part of my, he is my life. Like there's nothing I would, do or refrain from doing for myself to make his life better or safer or happier. So I think that's that constant juxtaposition, because then we also look at God doing that with his son in Christ. It's like he was willing to give of himself to give something to others. So how are we willing to do that? And you talked about like the idea of like release, and we don't know where it's going to go. And you pointed out the different scriptures in Proverbs and in Psalms. And I love the one where you talked about, like, I don't remember which one in Psalms, but like the idea of our children are like an arrow to be released. Yeah. And man, having a toddler, that kid is very much an arrow released. I think because I think an arrow on one end can definitely do some destruction. And man, if I send him out, he will do some destruction. But there's also something to pointing him towards something that is his purpose. And I think there's such a beautiful understanding in that with release. So if it's kids in college, or it's kids going into the nursery, the preschool, or kid going to elementary school, or joining an after school group, or jumping into a sport, I think we do have to do that. I think we have, for their betterment, but also for our own, because it does remind us to be trusting in God more than trusting in our own abilities. And I still don't know how to pronounce their names by any means. Is it Amram and Jochebed? I think. Yeah, Jochebed. Yeah, I think. You say it way better than I would read it. So, but I think that is the best thing of their story, is seeing that faith instilled. Because we're also got to remember that they're raising Aaron and Miriam along the way. And like you're talking about, they had there's a form of release for Aaron and Miriam having to see the brother return, and then the brother have to go leave, and then probably live a better life than them during that duration. Like he's in the palace, and they're remaining in slavery. Like whatever that looks like. Like I don't know what age they are, but it's got to be, they're already past the rearing age and probably in the working age at that time. And so, without a doubt, when you see Moses join back up, like it's got to be a hard thing, and that's got to be an opportunity of choosing to follow God. Like when we see Moses have his encounter, and he's like, "Oh Lord, I don't know how to talk." He's like, "Well, here, have your brother do it." It's like, that's right. His brother didn't have to like him right then. Be like, "Oh, you want me to be your voice, Mr. High and Mighty from the palace?" Like there's a lot to be seen within that family. Like I never thought of Moses and the family dynamic itself. Yeah, it's an interesting thing, because you bring that point up. Aaron now was a part of the family when they released him, and now Aaron has to embrace them back. And sometimes that is an aspect of family. We have to learn to embrace those that have been let go, and that can be tough too. Yeah, and then just I think the reminder was like talking about, even when you release, that's not your moment to stop investing. Yeah, and I think that's huge. I think releasing is important, but there's always going to be that burden on your heart. Like my mom is still a mom. Like she can't help it. Like when I cut my fingertip off, I checked with my wife, and then I called my parents, and my parents are on their way from Charlotte. My mom's like, "Speed, but don't speed too much." Like she's like, but she has that natural inclination just to want to be there and see that I'm okay. And so there is, for me, like I know that there's that continued investment. There's that continued prayer. Like talking about you mentioned someone who said they'd been praying for years over something, and they're finally seeing it break through. And so like encouraging you, like there is unanswered prayer isn't an ended prayer. Unanswered it might just be unanswered for now. So that doesn't mean to stop praying. Do you have an example of that, like maybe a long-term prayer of your own, even in relation to kids or not? I know it puts you on the spot there.
Yeah, I can't think of one off the top of my. Well, I mean, I know that we prayed for my dad for a long time for his healing and didn't get the answer in the way that we wanted, but he got his healing. It just was a healing in eternity, but I can't think of one specific right off the top of my head that we prayed for years and years, and then finally we saw God move. But there's been prayers that Jenny and I have prayed over our kids. Gretchen, my daughter, she was told she had seasonal asthma, and so and basically what that meant was anytime the seasons changed, that's when her asthma could act up.
Okay.
And so Jenny and I read a book together called Circle Maker by Mark Batterson. And basically what he's talking about is circling things in prayer. And so there's been several things that we have circled in prayer with our kids, and we prayed over for an extended amount of time. And I don't remember the time frame, I guess could be the thing. Yeah. But I remember praying for my daughter for quite a while. God, break her of this asthma, break her of this seasonal asthma. It wasn't something that debilitated her. She was still able to do sports. She was still able to do that. She ran track even with this quote unquote seasonal asthma. But I think it was probably, I think it's been 3 years since that I remember that her even using an inhaler. That's awesome. So, we've seen God work in that situation, but we started praying for her in that regards when she was little. One of my other kids had all of a sudden started developing, is it eczema? Is that what it's called on your skin? And it's just this rash on his skin. Went to a dermatologist. They said, this is what it is. You're going to have to use lotion. We just started praying over it. And I can't tell you the last time he's developed eczema on his skin, and so so there's just things you just keep praying over. You just keep praying until the answer is obvious that's been given, right? And so that's, I think there is a power in the fact that you keep praying. And even when it comes to our children, like for Miriam or for not for Miriam, but for Jochebed and Amram, I made this statement. I have to believe that when she took him back and was nursing him, she was praying over him. She was investing in him in those moments that she had him. But even when she took him back to the palace and released him to the palace, it doesn't say it in Scripture, but just to the context of their life, you have to believe that she was constantly still continuing to pray for Moses while he was in that palace. You never stop praying. Even if you've released your child, you still continue to pray over their life and invest in their life in that way. My mom's the same. Like I know that anytime we're going somewhere, my mom is constantly praying. I know that my mom is constantly praying for us. She doesn't, I'm almost 50. She doesn't raise me as her child in the same way that she raised me when I was in my teens and 20s and things like that. But she still covers me in prayer, and she still invests in my life in different ways. So you always are able to do that.
Yeah, no, I think that, like you talked about too, like it's you're trusting that they'll hold on to, or at least return to, the faith that you instill. And I think, like you're saying, like she doesn't raise you in the same ways, but very much she does by remaining in prayer, like she did. Like if that's foundational, then that can remain foundational even after release. Like just sending a kid to camp, like you can still be covering them in prayer, no different than when they go to school or anything else. Because like I think we see like a growth of homeschooling and all that, and I think that's great. I mean, I was a homeschool kid, so I've got nothing against homeschooling. I think it's an awesome opportunity, but I think sometimes that can be motivated out of fear of, like you're saying, like letting others, play a key role in your kid's life. And for a lot of people, it's not as practical, or whatever it is. You may not have that gift of teaching and things like that. Like my parents had to teach my sister and my younger brother much different than me. I was very self-motivated, so I was an easier student, but they had to learn that through me being a very terrible student when they just put me on a time restraint. So there's all these different methods, but I think a universal method is that the continuation of prayer. Like, and you're talking about like the seasonal asthma, like our kid had, like, he didn't open his one of his eyes for like the first like month of his life, and they kept saying like, oh yeah, he'll open his eye up, it's no big deal. It's like, started going to the doctor's appointment, like, man, like he still's not open that eye, and it turns out like he has like, it's called a ptosis, where his eyelid's just not as strong in one eye, and there's nothing to do, there's nothing to prevent it. Like it just happens with some kids, the muscle's just not strong. So like everybody always walks over to a kid and like, oh man, looks like he's sleepy, or he just woke up. It's like, nah man, his eye just kind of always looks like that. So like that's something that we still continue to pray for, but he has great vision in that eye. And anytime we go to the appointment, they're like, we could have surgery just to make it aesthetically look better. Mm-hmm. But for us, it's also a good reminder, like, frankly, like, and I hate having to have a visual on my kid, but it's a good reminder to be constantly praying for our child, because if it's not that part of his health, it's some other aspect needs to be covered. And so we can at least use that as a motivation tactic to like pray for his health, to pray for provision, and to thank God for where he's at now. Like at one point it wasn't open at all, and now it's open above the pupil, so he can see fully and engage fully with that eye. And that was because that's answered prayer. So maybe it's not answered in the way that we're yet hoping, but it's at least we can acknowledge God in that. And there's a vulnerability in that, but you worry they're like, oh, you'd have surgery, wait till they're 4, because that's when kids kind of get meaner. I'm like, oh, I dare a kid to get meaner, because our kid's going to be fully confident in his own skill sets and abilities and everything like that. And it might just be a good opportunity for a testament of God's already provision, as opposed to just something that we're going to brush aside. So it teaches you that different intentionality, but it doesn't mean it's any easier as a parent to watch it.
And you brought up the homeschools. Let me just speak towards that for a second. I have a lot of friends that have kids that are homeschooled, and I have nothing against homeschooling. My kids are in a public school, but you made a great point, and I do want to think, what is the motive when we do decide to homeschool, or if a parent decides to homeschool, what is the motivation behind wanting to do that, right? What's the desire? If it is fear, then I don't know if that is the greatest motivation for why we might homeschool. If we're afraid, I don't want them to be exposed to. Eventually, they're going to be exposed to, because unless they just live a completely sheltered life, they're eventually going to be exposed to something in the world. Yeah. So now there's all kind of reasons that there can be. Maybe there are difference of opinions in how they're taught, or things that are taught, or bullying may come into the fact, and the only way to get out of that is to find another alternative. I get that. I get all those things. So I'm not saying don't homeschool. You got to do what's best for you and your family. But I will say I know tomorrow can be totally different, but for our kids, we got 2 about to graduate from public school, have been in it since kindergarten. One is in the high school now, and what's been great is they've been in that, and we've watched them develop in their spiritual walk with Christ, even in public school. And I think the big key factor through all of that is the fact that Jenny and I have open conversations with our kids. Yeah. Conversations at home is huge. That is, if you have a child in anything, that's what you need. You always need to be talking to them and asking about what they're learning, asking about what's happening, and knowing that they can always come to you and not feel like awkward coming to you with stuff and awkward talking to you about. I mean, I've had some great conversations with my sons, and Jenny's had some great conversations with my daughter, that we're so thankful that they were able to come and freely talk to us about things they've heard at school, things that were said at school, things that they've seen done at school. And so we're able to talk to them through that stuff. Mm-hmm. And then how do we handle that with our values as followers of Christ? Yeah. And so that's always huge. And I don't think that going to public school it will ruin someone's faith. Any more than I think working in the secular world as an adult is going to ruin someone's faith. I think it's all about how you are and how you mentor them and walk with them through that journey. Yeah. And that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that's like you say is the rate train a child. Like as you're saying, like raise them the way to go. It's like it's just an intentionality. Like whatever the time, if it's time spent in homeschooling, teaching those principles, or if it's time in conversations after schooling. Absolutely. I think it's just the intentionality is the key to success, because there's going to be plenty of kids. I mean, I knew them that were homeschooled that once they finally got that taste, it's like they're almost like the Amish kid getting the year off. They're like and letting you choose like which path. Yeah, like which path are you going with? And it's like some went very non-Amish. Let's say that. And so I think it's all about intentionality. You can't. That's right. It's going to be impossible, to shelter your kid from exposure. Like it happens. Like that's why there's sunscreen. Like we call it sunblock. It's like when it don't block the sun, it reduces. But I think with everything there's got to be a balance to it, and there's got to be an intentionality. But moving on to the second part of
Moses.
our two-part. Yeah, Moses. We've got Moses as a baby, but now Moses as the adult. Mm-hmm. Do you learn any fun aspect of Moses in going back through this? And there's okay. I mean, you may have already known everything there was to know.
No, I'm not saying that I knew everything there was to know about Moses. It's always been interesting to me how Moses could. I think the one thing that I thought about was the fact that Moses, going back to him being in the palace and that God was orchestrating all this, God knew where this was going to end up. Yeah. And so, yes, Moses left the palace. He ran from the palace. The Pharaoh wanted to kill him. But because Moses had been in the palace and because Moses had been around the throne, when God opened the door, Moses was able to approach the throne.
Yeah, that's
good. And he was able to have conversation with the Pharaoh in that moment. And maybe time healed a little bit, and Pharaoh wasn't as quick to jump to kill Moses as soon as he walked back around the palace grounds. But for whatever reason, Moses had the opportunity. You think, would anybody else have had the opportunity to freely walk into the palace, to freely approach the Pharaoh and to say, God is telling you to let these people go? And even though he knew the Pharaoh wasn't going to do it, or he had a feeling, but just the fact how God was orchestrating all this and lining all this up so that Moses would be the one to go back in and say, you've got to let them go.
Yeah, familiarity opens a lot more doors than you think. And I love doing that compare because we didn't touch on it before. You talked a little bit about the history of when this is what Pharaoh, because Pharaoh is a position, not a person.
Right.
And so is this the 18th dynasty of Egypt or the 19th? People argue over, and I love the history. I have an archaeological Bible, and you talking about that's the Hyksos era. So they were more monotheistic, and then they moved into a new competing Pharaoh dynasty was more about polytheism. So maybe that's why they related, because it's hey, we're about one God, you Hebrews are about one God. Well, hey, we're moving back to multiple gods. We don't like your idea of focusing on one God. And then you see those battles. That's not what you didn't focus on it here, but you see that with the plagues. It's I'll drop my staff, it's going to turn into a snake. Your conjurers will try and do it, and my snake eats your snakes. So it's you celebrate multiple gods, and you see something happen. I turn the river. My God turns the river to blood. Yours turns water red. There's a little bit level of comparison there, but I think you're saying, without growing up in that environment, he wouldn't know the culture of the court itself. He wouldn't know the formalities of approaching it in the right way. He's probably still operating in a respectful manner. He's just asking for a release. It's the non-release, the unmerited release that leads to chaos. It's just the hardened heart that leads to problems. It's not the request. And so I think that's huge, because as much as they tried to move on from or forget or lack of acknowledgement of Joseph, God can still place someone right in the court of Pharaoh nonetheless. There can still be a number two. You can either be the guy who's the foreigner who comes in, or you can be the guy who was raised as a brother. That's tough. You can't avoid God's will, and it doesn't matter if you're a part of it or not. He's going to move, and he's going to line things up. So better to be a part of it than to be against it.
That's right.
But I think it's the thing that stood out with me, Moses, is having a questioning faith doesn't preclude you from being in the hall of faith. I think good. He's constantly has these questions from God. He's all right, I'm calling you, Moses. I can't talk. He's all right, well then I've got this for you. He's what about this? I don't know, God. He's man, just go and do. Just go and do so. But he questioned at a lot of these turns, but he did ultimately go and do as the Lord asked him. And then he's in that hall of faith. So you might have questions, you might have concerns, you might need clarification. I talked about it when I talked about doubting Thomas. Poor Thomas got called the doubter, but he's just asking questions. We don't get on Moses. We don't call him doubting Moses.
Right.
Instead we call him this champion of acting in faith. So if you ask questions, that's okay. Some of us are wired in those kind of ways, and God loves giving answers. He loves not necessarily being tested. Jesus says, don't test God. You don't want to test God, but he does love a challenge, I would say. Like, I think he loves to be able to prove himself. I think he loves to show how faithful he can be and how wise he is. And that's no different than in parenting either. You know, like, I want my kid to test my strength one day. Like, I want him to shove up, and I want to be able to bury him in a wrestling match. I think that'll be fun with no skill at all. You know, like, but I think it's good. It's good for both sides. And so I think that's what was a reminding in me with the whole going through Moses again, is like, man, you can be a champion of faith while still struggling through your faith sometimes. And I think that can be encouraging to a lot of people, is that God can move through, again, another flawed person. Abraham wasn't perfect through the process. Moses was not perfect through the process. And that's why Jesus could come and be a greater Moses than Moses, because he actually was perfect. Yeah. Like, and I think we take that for granted, like threading that needle of like walking life perfectly. I haven't walked perfectly today. I already got impatient with someone today. You know what I mean? Like, it's a daily occurrence of just trying to make sure you do things well.
Right.
But I'm glad to have another opportunity to do things well again, because by grace I'm saved, and then by faith I get to walk. And so I think that's the first thing that stood out for me amongst all this. But then I think a big key for you was, it was talking about, when we're walking from something, he's always calling us from something, but he's also calling us to something.
Right.
So if you want to talk a little bit more about the from and to.
Yeah, because I think, you know, a lot of times we miss that key aspect when they were preparing in the Passover. You know, the whole aspect of the unleavened bread, it cooks quicker, it doesn't rise, doesn't take the time to rise. And then the fact that he told them to eat it with your shoes on and your walking sticks in your hand. Because you're preparing yourself to, I'm going to deliver you, but you're preparing yourself to be delivered from, so that you can be delivered to. And I think a lot of times in our spiritual walk and in our faith, especially if we get saved, if we experience salvation, we come to Jesus, we surrender our life to Christ, and then we think, okay, I've done it.
Yeah.
You know, I've arrived, I've gotten my salvation, I'm free in Christ now. But that's not the end of it, because Christ never just frees you to be there.
Yeah, existing.
He frees you to move towards something. He frees you to go towards his promises. He frees you to work through you for his glory and for his kingdom purposes. And so I think that's something we really have to keep in mind, that we're not just saved from, we're saved from and saved to something.
Yeah. It's not of faith; it's by faith. By faith is very much.
It's a big difference.
It's a huge action oriented thing.
Yeah.
And I know we'll start, because we started a little series, but like talking about like the importance of our witness. Like, it's a non-optional concept, and so that's where we're at. Like, it's not just and because it's even easy to fall in the trap when you just focus on where you're saved from. It's easy to be identifying of where you were, even while you're somewhere new, because you don't have anywhere to go. Like when you're trying to get out of, you know, sinking sand, it's smart to be present. Like, you need to get out. Like, you need to be focused. Like, oh, hey, I got to think about what I'm doing for lunch. Like, you're sinking in sand. Let's get out the sand. But then don't still be a victim of a sand pit. Once you're walking on good ground, let's go somewhere else. Don't just be like, well, I'm too scared to take a step because I might fall in sand again. Like, you got to walk to where your ultimate destination is, and that's part of that is partnering with God. Like, if you're concerned about what the future holds, if you're concerned about where you're going, then maybe go lean a little bit more into God and ask him, where am I going? What are you calling me to? That's why it's not bad to ask questions. It's not bad to ask clarifying, but just still being willing to step forward even without knowing ultimately where those details are. Not knowing each and every step, just knowing an ultimate destination. And if the most clarity you get is just to reach others, then move toward that. Like, I have so many people that have talked to me like, I just don't know what to do in life. I don't know where to go. I don't know where God's calling me. It's like, well, I mean, you can go back if you really want to go to the basics of it. He's like, he's not told me anything. He's like, I mean, he did in the Gospels. You know, like, if you haven't heard any command beyond go and witness or go and share what you've seen, then I would keep operating at least in that. That's the bare minimum of it. But God will give you details along the way.
Well, the whole word, the whole aspect of faith, faith, even in the noun form, is linked to a verb. It's linked to action. There's no real just plain noun term of faith in the Greek, especially, it's all linked to an action thing. It's meant to be something that is done. And so because your faith is not just something that you believe and in the sense that you know it exists, it's a faith that you believe in and act from. You believe in and act from. That's why James says in his letter, you believe, great. Even the demons believe, and they shudder. So, but the demons don't have faith. They believe, but they don't have faith. And I think that's sometimes where we get confused, and where people get confused is like, well, it's enough. I believe, so I'm a Christian. I believe in Jesus. Okay, but belief, faith is belief in action.
Yeah.
And so does your life show that you believe? That's the difference. And that was the other aspect of that when we looked at, when you get to that part where they get to the Red Sea and they're getting ready to cross, and they say, you should have just left us there. We told you this was going to be the problem. Well, wouldn't it be better for us to be in Egypt? No, it wasn't better for you to be in Egypt. But the whole concept, when you start thinking about that, they're complaining, why are you saying wouldn't it be better in Egypt? Because just a couple of chapters back, we're reading how you were praying to be delivered from.
Yeah.
But what they were praying to be delivered from was the bondage and the slavery. But they didn't want to leave Egypt. But you can't be delivered.
Also, I guess they wanted, their best alternative was to stay in Egypt as free citizens, I guess.
But you can't be freed from what has you bound if you don't leave what has you bound.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes that's where we think, well, I have this good feeling moment and I believe God has freed me from this. But then if you never walk away from where the bondage comes from, you don't walk away from the addiction, you don't walk away from the worldly abusive relationships, right? And I'm not marriage is a totally different thing. I didn't get into that. And I think this is why God speaks to not marrying unbelievers and things like that, because if you're a believer and you marry an unbeliever, it's going to be difficult. But if you're married, there is that bound covenant. And so now there's a prayer that you've got to pray, because you can't just walk away from a covenant relationship that you've entered into. So there's some prayer that has to go into that, and how is God going to work through this situation. But if you have other friendships and relationships in your life and things like that are worldly, that are influencing you, that have a grip on you, you may need to walk away from those relationships from a time being. If you're in a job that is causing you to do things that are against the will and the way of God, then you need to walk away from that job. Whatever it is, where the source of addiction, bondage, oppression, whatever comes from spiritually, for you to fully be delivered from, you've got to walk away from it.
Yeah, no, like you said, it's like we're often drawn toward the idea of like either feeling some way, having something, or being someone outside the will of God. And it takes a choice to actually do that. Like when Daniel spent the night in the lion's den, and then the king comes the next morning, he's like, all right, Daniel, come out of there. He didn't, and it doesn't say Daniel's like, I'm going to hang out in here. It's like, buddy, I've been delivered from lions. Like last night I was safe. I'm not hanging out in here tonight too. Like I'm not going to have to test God's provision. He's opened the door. Like that's always the old joke of the guy who, he's drowning in the ocean. He's like, oh God, send me help. And the guy shows up in a John boat. He's like, don't worry, God. He's like, I'm not getting in. Don't worry, I'll save me. Another one comes by. And by the end he dies and he gets to heaven. He's like, why do you see? He's like, I sent 3 different people to get you out. Like, buddy, like we gave you opportunities. Like I wasn't going to be me walking out there. So there's a point of when we have the opportunity to be delivered from something, you still have to walk out, because it is easy to, I'm not saying easy, but I've known people to stay in the place of struggle, or at least they continue to identify with that struggle as opposed to moving forward into opportunity. And I think there's again, as there is intentionality in prayer, as there is intentionality in parenting, there's got to be an intentionality into walking into salvation as opposed to remaining in what we're saved from. Because at minimum, if you remain it, maybe the bondage isn't there, but it has the opportunity to crop back up and create new bondage. And
it's what we become comfortable with it.
Yeah.
We linger around what we're comfortable with because we're afraid if everything don't go great, then I'll just fall back into what I was comfortable with, even though I know what it did to me. And so, but this is just what this is just what I know. And we're afraid of the unknown. Most people have a fear of what's unknown. They, you've got your some out there that they're the risk takers. They don't care that, they'll jump towards anything. But I think your average person has that fear of what's going to happen next, and this something new, and this something that I'm not familiar with, and I don't know where I'm going. We've talked about that, and so there's that trust factor. But faith is boiled down to it's surrender. When it comes to God, faith is surrender and it's trust.
Yep.
I said that over and over through the series, and I'll keep saying, and it will continue to pop up. But that's what faith is. It's you're surrendering to God and you're trusting God as you move forward.
Yeah, and that's like you said, it starts with that saving faith, but then it moves into like an acting faith. Like it's not, you can't just like, yes, it's that faith that saves, but you can't stay at that point either, because you've got to grow. Like God's calling us into freedom so we can get other people into that same freedom. Like, and I think it's important, like, and talking about just the, Israelites, it was the idea they had to be able to trust God that he was going to bring them into something better than what they had in Egypt. Not just bring them out of something in Egypt, to bring them into something better.
Right.
And so we have to trust that in our own lives. Like we have to believe that where we're going is better than the comfortable place than we've been in. That where there's familiarity, sure, that soon, all the only difference between where you're at now and where you are eventually in familiarity is time. Like, I can be familiar with where I'm at now because I've been here. Once I go somewhere, after a while, you can be familiar with that good place too. Like, you can be familiar with a better version. Why stay in the outdated when you can be in the renewed state of being? Like, if you're picking where God's going, it's not an evil. It's just might be hard. But hard is not enough to be a barrier in our lives. And just like it isn't in parenting. Like, releasing is hard, just as tied to the first week, but it doesn't mean that it's not good. You know, like, whereas sin is what you talked about, is like, you can't tame a lion or a tiger. It's a predator. Like, a predator is a predator. You can't bring that out. We have a husky, and it's about as close as it gets to like a natural wolf. And man, sometimes I'm like, there's some predator in you. You know what I mean? Like, it's like you go to give him his dinner bowl, and I'm like, I've done as much as I can. Like, I've literally wrestled our dog, like to make sure he knows I'm boss. Like the old Snow Dogs movie, they say bite him on the ear. I bit him on the ear as a puppy, and it's worked. Like that dog listens to me. But Kirsten has not wrestled our dog, and I think he listens to her less. So there's a measure to acting out in being over your life as opposed to being a victim of your circumstance. Yeah. So, but I never could get over the idea. Like, we see it still throughout Israel, and I'm sure we'll see it more in the By Faith series with different people, but of how much they still longed for like captivity, because at least captivity was consistent. Like, they get so worried over consistency, and it's like, man, the whole Old Testament is just showing you that, man, if you just follow God where he calls you, it's gonna be good. Like, it might be hard, but it's gonna be good. And like, that's the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is like, oh, Aslan, it's like the lion, like, he's not safe, but he's good. Like, God is not safe necessarily, but he's good, and I'd rather go where it's good.
Well, you think about how accurate that picture of humanity is with them, and how quickly, as soon as something is difficult, even in our faith journey, how quickly we forget the negativity of what we were captive to.
Yes.
We forget the hurt. We forget the pain. And all we think about is we'll just use terms from today, the dopamine hit that we get from it. We forget the negative always outweighed that one good feel, the one good dopamine moment. But all we can think about is the dopamine hit and how that moment made us feel. So I'm going to go. So we think about all that and want to go back to that moment, but all we're going back to is the captivity. The moment's only going to be a moment.
Yeah.
And the struggle and the what we might go through in our faith journey, I would rather go through that than the hurt and the pain of captivity.
Yeah.
It's a far better experience, and then the end of it will be far better as well.
No, and I think that you said, talking about like for the people who are struggling, like not hearing the Lord. And we'll see moments of Israel, you see it throughout the Old Testament after this, like they have to be reminded of the faith because there's going to be these times where they're getting attacked or they're walking in, the desert or whatever it is. And they're like, it doesn't feel like the Lord's there. But you said like an accurate test of faith is when it's not evident that he's there. I think that's a good reminder for me, and like, there's definitely been moments that I'm like, all right, Lord, like, what are we doing here? Like, why have you called me into this? And then I feel like you've just gone straight silent on me. It's like, but that's a real testing of my faith. Is like, am I willing? It's easy to walk when you're like, God's like, go here, turn left, turn right. It's like, but if all of a sudden notifications got muted, you're like, is he there? It's like, he's still there. Yeah. His precepts are still the same. The trust can still remain because there was a time before that it was silent and he moved after that. So remaining in faith, I think, is of utmost importance. And that's probably the side of Moses' mom. And it's like, all right, well, you gave me the opportunity to be with him. You gave me the opportunity to have him return to me. But ultimately, I know that his life is under your control and I'm going to give him back, but I'm going to remain in faith. And I don't know if she's one of them that walked out of Egypt at the same time, but she had the opportunity to remain in faith, and I'm sure she probably did and spent that time in prayer because you see Miriam walk and you see Aaron walk. So how she raised and remaining in faith of what was in front of her, I think is important. I think that's a huge commission for us moving forward.
Well, we didn't talk a lot about Joseph, but you got to think Joseph throughout his life, he wondered, where's God?
Yeah.
He gets visions of what's going to happen in his life as a young man, but then all of a sudden his brothers turn on him. His brothers sell him into slavery. He ends up in Egypt. He's working in the palace. Now he works his way up, but he goes through some times. He gets thrown in prison. I'm sure through those moments, we read through that kind of quickly in the Bible, but those are years. And there's got to be time frames where he's wondering, when is this vision going to play out? God, where are you in this? And then even David, David working as a shepherd, he didn't ask to be named the next king.
Yeah.
He just gets named the next king, and then the next thing you know, he's in the palace, but then he becomes friends with the king's son, but then the king realizes he's going to be the next in line. The king's throwing spears at him, and now David's running from the king. He's hiding in caves, and you see him literally write in the Psalms, God, where are you?
Yeah.
When are you going to believe me? So, these guys all went through that, but their struggle in the times where they were wondering where God is was far greater than any struggle of ever staying in a life outside of God.
Yeah.
So.
No, I think choosing separation is different than feeling separated.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great point. That's a great way to word it.
I think Jesus on the cross, the only time he felt separated from in all of his eternity was on the cross when sin comes on him. He's like, the Lamak Sabachthani or whatever, why have you forsaken me? And he's like, he felt that moment of separation, but he didn't choose that to be his end. He could have gone down to the grave and been like, God's already separate from me. He's like, no, I've got a task about me. God is not talking to me now, but I know the mission stays the same. He called me in to this. I'm going to go take the keys of death, and I'm going to go back and save people. So we talk about the faith of Jesus to walk in his life, but there was a faith in walking in death as well.
That's right.
He could have given up, like, man, this was tough. I don't think I can make it. But he's like, no, I'm trusting that if I continue on where he called me to, even when I don't hear him, I don't feel him anymore, he's going to raise me back as he said he would.
That's right.
So I think
it's a great point.
That's the huge part. Like every bit of all these things, like we're saying, like when we talked about in the beginning, he's the better Moses. And so I know we're not talking about by faith to just cover these people. These are all good, but it's still ultimately to point back to the red letters. Like we're just getting back to where Jesus was and how he's trying to remind people. And what Hebrews is trying to do is just to remind people that salvation has already come, and salvation is for each of us. And I know you encourage it, if people have not found that, but truly, if you have not found that faith,
that's right.
Find that faith in this. We're doing all this to build faith, to be by faith, but also so that we can act in faith as well.
That's right.
So, I'm excited to continue the series. It's going to be fun.
Just a little bit more. We got Jericho coming up, and then after that, it's the ending of Hebrews, and I think it'll be good.
Awesome.
So I'm looking forward to it.
It'll be good. We'll tune in next time.
That's right.